Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Dan Blanchard with the Travel in Time with Dan show, where we mix travel and history and leadership, and of course with me, Dan Blanchard. Today, I am in Provincetown, P-Town, the very tip of the Cape in Cape Cod. This is where the Pilgrims in 1620 first landed. Yes, I know everybody believes it's Plymouth, Massachusetts, but they spent 5 weeks here at P-Town, Provincetown, Cape Cod, where after 66 grueling days crossing the Atlantic. Yes, 5 weeks here first. This is where the Pilgrims landed in the New World, not Plymouth. Plymouth is where they would eventually settle, but this is where they landed. Now, right behind me, over my shoulder, you could see the Pilgrims Museum and the tower, right? This is the Pilgrims Monument. It's 350 feet above sea level. So you can see that right here, and you might be able to hear some wind blowing in the background here. That's how it is. We're way out in the ocean at the tip of Cape Cod. All right, so now, we all know the story about the Mayflower, the Pilgrims coming over to the New World, escaping religious persecution and all the other things they were escaping, better lives over here. What you may not know is that through the king, they had a contract with the king to live in the northern section of the Virginia colony. Now, that's not exactly Virginia, it's the Hudson River, New York. That's the northern end of Virginia colony. Now, they didn't land there. They landed here, Providence, in the New World, and they were like, hey, we are no longer under the king's charter. That means no rules. Every man for himself. We could do whatever the heck we wanted. And this was a little bit scary when they landed here in Provincetown, this sandy, rough place, lacking fresh water, and the people eventually broke off into two groups, right? They were called the Saints, which was the ones looking for religious freedom, and the Strangers. Those were like the merchants looking to make some money and a better life. Now, this could have turned into like a Lord of the Flies things, no rules, everybody for themselves, killing each other, all that stuff. But before they got off the boat, they said, hey, listen, before we all go crazy on each other, let's create what's called the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact is basically going to be a way of self-governing themselves, like a social contract, that they're not just going to go kill each other and the strong takes what the strong wants and all that stuff, right? So this is like the beginnings of democratic government in the New World here, which will eventually become the colonies and then the United States of America, the Mayflower Compact here between the Saints and the Strangers in this really wind-blown, rough, sandy area lacking water. All right. Now, one of the journeys, it was probably the second journey here, I believe, there was this thing called Corn Hill. Corn Hill was a bunch of the colonists here. They basically robbed the Native Americans of corn that they had hidden for the winter months for food. They were desperate. They were hungry. They didn't know how to feed themselves like the indigenous natives did, so they just kind of robbed them. This is going to, as you can imagine, this is going to create problems in the relationships between the colonists and the indigenous Native Americans here. All right, that's going to be a big, big problem. Now, eventually, after spending about 5 weeks here, and they can't seem to find any good soil for farming. Everything is there is kind of sandy. Cape Cod's known for the dunes. You drive into this Provincetown, and as soon as you hit the line that says you're entering Provincetown, you just see sand and sand dunes everywhere. So you can imagine them spending 5 weeks trying to survive here and saying, hey, we can't do it. Well, right behind me is the Cape Cod Bay. And they just sailed straight across the Cape Cod Bay, and they landed in what's today called Plymouth, Massachusetts, the Rock, the Pilgrim story, all that. They're going to land there and set up a settlement there where the soil is much better for farming. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this Pilgrims Monument behind me to commemorate that the Pilgrims actually landed here. Very few people know that, but they actually landed there. It's 350 feet above sea level. There's a museum there, beautiful view of the surrounding area. And something that most people don't know, that this monument began construction in 1907 with Teddy Roosevelt here to commemorate it, the laying of the cornerstone, all that. And when the monument ceremony was over, Teddy Roosevelt sailed home back to Long Island, New York. Are you ready for this? In 1907, sailed home back to Long Island, New York on a ship that was called the Mayflower. Yep, the Mayflower, go figure, right? 3 years later in 1910, President Taft was here to see the finishing or the end of the construction of this monument tower, 350 feet above sea level here, right? So what you need to know is that this Plymouth Colony, right, what started here in Provincetown. The Plymouth Colony was one of the earliest successful colonies in the New World. So you know I like to combine travel with history and leadership. Obviously, if you have not been down here to P-Town, Provincetown, you have got to come down here. There's about 3,000 people here in the off season, and then in this peak season, you're looking at 60,000 people. Great beaches, great shops. What an amazing little beach community this is, right? Way out on the very tip of Cape Cod. The history, I've given you a little bit of the history here. Now, what's the leadership? The leadership is great leaders adapt when plans fail, right? 5 weeks they tried to make it here and they just couldn't. So they sailed across the water and said, what's next? They found Plymouth, more fertile soil, better for crops, and they made it there, not one of the first successful colonies in the New World. All right, well, thank you everyone for spending time with me, Dan Blanchard, the Travel and Time with Dan show, where we mix travel with history and leadership, and of course with me, Dan Blanchard. Get up in that monument, get up in that tower behind me. You won't be sorry, and I will see you again somewhere else very soon. Take care now.